6:30, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We will begin as usual with a roll call. We have Steve Whitman, Bonnie Sears, Bridget Powers, me, Rebecca Hansen, Bill Bolton, Marianne Barnsley, and Brian Murphy. Chris Buckley is absent this evening. We will next move on to a review of minutes from our meeting on June 20th. Has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes? Any comments, edits, anything?
One comment, one potential edit. Some of the little things that make it into the minutes have helped me read the minutes. So I like where after one of Bill's comments, it says the board laughed, just to make sure I'm paying attention. But then on page 4, there was some text about what Frank shared. And it's item 3 at the very bottom, the end of the sentence. It says he is trying to get an element that can be given to the citizens. I don't think you're trying to give the citizens an element. And I was trying to think of a word. I don't think it's a document either. But it was when you were talking about trying to communicate with people, some of the terminology that we use. So.
I can't think of the context of the...
I can't either. Yeah. And maybe it can stay an element then, but because the rest of it reads fine.
Excerpt?
Sure.
Summary?
Better. If it's okay with Frank.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had, those two things.
Which word?
I heard a few words. I heard summary,
Excerpt.
excerpt.
Your call, Madam Chair.
Jeez.
Just pick one.
Pressure.
Just pick one.
Summary.
Exmerary.
Yeah.
Is it summary?
Thank you. Just pick one. That's the answer.
Yeah, you win, Bridget.
I like to win.
But can the board laugh at that one?
Rebecca always liked you best.
Only when you speak, though.
So I'll make a motion to accept these as amended.
Approve them.
Approve them? Yeah.
I'll second that.
All those in favor of approving the amended minutes?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Done. Next up, review of the following application is continued from June 20th, pending the question of notifying holders of conservation easements. Brian, do you just want to summarize?
Sure. I put the question to, well, first of all, I called Tom Hahn, who works for Green Acres Woodland. He said they had no conservation easements on the property, which pretty much answered our question. Then I put it to the town council to see what that actually means as far as our procedures and the underlying stuff. He sent back the email, which I provided to the members, and the gist of it is conservation easements on the subject property, not on the abutting properties. It goes to records. We don't keep town records of conservation easements yet. I don't think we're required to. We're going to do it just as a tool for us, I think.
Great.
Great.
And, you know, and because they define abutters in the RSA, and those aren't included in there, so it has to reflect back on the original property. So that being the case, I think there are no conservation easements on the subject property, nor on the abutting properties, it turns out.
All right. Great. Thank you for digging into that.
No problem.
Once I got your emails, I didn't follow up with Lakes Region Planning Commission because it seemed pretty clear that that's, but that's a good lesson learned for us. And also, it seems like a lot of these properties are going to go through some sort of title search. So when you purchase a property, you know that there's an easement on there. So,
Correct.
But having that in the town records, I think, is helpful. So, okay.
So the status of the application from last month was that it was accepted as complete. So we've carried it forward to this month, so
Yep.
it just needs a determination of whether it's approved.
We've continued the public hearing just in case, I think we just decided we didn't want, in case someone else showed up and wanted, we didn't
Right.
want to have them not be able to speak on this application. So, so I'll open up the public hearing in a second once I read through the bold writing on the agenda again. And then we'll open up for the public hearing, and then, unless, well, I'll read it first, and we can decide if we have anything to talk about. Then I'll open up to the public hearing. and then we can talk again and then make a determination. Okay, so we are going to now continue from June 20th, the one-lot subdivision from the parent parcel PID number 234-018, requested by Mountain Stream Properties through Mountain Mapping, subdividing out a proposed parcel of 1.94 acres for the new lot, reserving 1.47 acres for the parent parcel. Both front on Texas Hill Road and both lie within the agricultural zone. Okay. Any discussion from the board before I open it up to a public hearing? Okay, it is 6:36, opening up to the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak of any nature on this proposal? It's 6:36, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the board. Any discussion from the board or a motion to approve this proposal?
After reading what the lawyer and city council, whatever, everything that Brian did, I would say that we should approve this. Looks to me like it's fine.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion before we vote? All right, all those in favor of approving this application?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Oh, I did close the public hearing. Yeah.
You did.
It was so quick, I can't. Okay.
Okay.
I'm happy to sign it now if that works, so, whatever.
Save them a trip.
Yeah, right.
Came all the way, can't leave empty-handed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board.
Thank you.
Welcome. Good luck.
Welcome.
All right, paperwork. All right. Next up, continued discussion on the master plan. Chris is out today, our taskmaster slash box checker slash, whatever.
Adjourner.
Yeah, adjourner, yeah. I don't know how we're gonna get out of here tonight. Yeah. Not yet, Bonnie.
I'll wait.
So we don't have the master business that we've been talking about.
We failed. Sorry about that.
I wouldn't say it's a
Chris was
failure
on
yet.
vacation, and I had a
It's okay.
doozy of a week, and we didn't get to it.
No worries. Everyone's deeply disappointed.
I know.
All right,
Mostly me.
so I don't have a ton of stuff prepped for this because I've had a doozy of a month. That was not me trying to one-up you, Bridget. But let me tell you. But Steve has put together all this information of these basic, maybe you should just explain these again.
So the sheets that Brian printed up for you, there are just two new ones. There's one for the single-family residential district, which you did in May at the meeting I missed, and I got Rebecca's notes and tried to at least piece together a sheet. So it has some elements of a purpose and any notes I had related to district boundary changes, if there were any. And then the dimensional standards and the approved uses are just as they are from the zoning now. And so the other new sheet, if you flip through your packet, would be for the rural residential, which we talked about quite a bit in June, the June meeting. And you'll see that that one still has a lot of things highlighted yellow. Like the rest of these districts, we have a lot of work to do. Just to continue to refine how we would define these places within the community, how they're distinctly different, and if they're not, then how we will combine them with another district. And so the dimensional standards for rural residential are as they are right now in the agricultural district. So based on the conversation and what's reflected in the minutes from last month, we're going to want to revisit that because that's a higher level of density than most people were saying that they would want to have in that more rural part of the community. The uses are also just as reflected in the existing agricultural district. So I've done these. The area of the community that's still left to be talked about that we kind of have nibbled at a little bit in different conversations would be that main commercial strip along Tenny Mountain Highway. Some of it falls within the agricultural district now, some of the development activity, but a lot of it's in that industrial commercial district. And what I saw in the minutes and what I remembered from the last meeting is we said we would set a time to look at a map, look at the maps from the master plan, and then go out there. And so I don't know if that's part of what we want to do today, is kind of figure out a work plan to take on that investigation. Because if we could schedule a work session where we could maybe assemble here first, look at the maps, get oriented, come up with a plan, and then go out to the district and decide on a couple of locations that we should visit, and have some discussion. And I know we'd have to notice that, right, Brian?
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
It's still a meeting. Minutes will be taken, but it's basically a site walk. Done at the work session, there'll be no motions or anything other than to adjourn.
Okay. And we could probably accommodate everybody in 2 vehicles and just go and have some conversations all together at a couple of locations.
Yeah.
I think then if we could come back here and kind of what did we see, what types of issues, we could then create one of these sheets as a starting point. I know we've talked about potentially engaging some of the students I'm working with when they get back in September to do some background stuff and to help with some examples. But those are my initial thoughts.
I think that's great. Can we do that for our next work session?
Absolutely, and there's nothing that in the book that says we can't adjourn at a local restaurant.
I was thinking about
Twist
that.
our arm. So that would be August. Is that going to work for people? Are people around? It would be August 1st, you're saying?
Yep.
Works for me.
I'm here the 1st, but not the 15th.
On this, I don't know. So August 1st,
August 1st works.
could we, because it's going to be a work session where we're going to look at maps and then go out in the field, could we meet earlier? Like, could we meet here? I don't know if this is, I'm getting looks. I can't tell if people are excited about earlier or not.
I'm here,
excited.
so
I can make it happen on Thursdays, yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking we have daylight, but if we don't start at 6 or 5:30 or something, I mean, to look at maps for half an hour and kind of come up with a
Right.
plan and then go out and go to a couple locations and look around,
Okay.
it could be hard to get it done. And then
think
come
I
early
back.
think
is
that's a good
better.
idea. So if we, do you think 5:30 an hour early would be sufficient?
I can meet as early as you want.
yeah, same here. I mean,
10 a.m.? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure.
well, I mean, the
we could always
building
get done
closes
early,
at
too.
4:30.
Yeah.
So anytime after that,
Okay.
and like Steve says, the earlier the better, probably, just to take advantage of the light.
5?
5
would be great.
Right, good.
So the agenda for that meeting, if I'm just getting this right, would be 5 o'clock here. Would it be helpful if we projected those maps and looked at them together?
Unless I can get the maps. I've finally gotten in touch with Greg,
Oh, you
but
did?
nothing.
Okay.
So, but he suggested somebody else that you didn't suggest from
Yeah,
North Country Council.
I
So
didn't
I'll
have
reach
any
out
luck.
to that person. So,
I saw a hand out in the audience.
Oh,
yes. Grace.
Grace Garvey for the record. 2 questions. What would be the goal, like, I wonder if it'd be worthwhile to just make a list of the goals of what you're going out to look at?
Yeah, let's do
I
that.
mean, I know you already have all that stuff in mind, but like really to sit down with the maps and say, these are our goals, baby, because I think in my experience that could get, there could be project creep. So keep that up. And wondering if the public can participate in that.
Sure they can, public,
Sure.
it's a public meeting. They gotta get their own ride.
No worries.
Not going to the restaurant with us. Just kidding.
Once we adjourn, it's like
Yeah.
all ours.
I don't have those minutes with me from the early June meeting, right? I don't know if someone does, but my recollection was, as we started talking about the agricultural district, of course, we kept talking about some of the commercial districts along Tenny Mountain Highway, and we had talked about the Gateway District, routes 3, 3A, and other state highways, as Frank said. And it became clear that there were different areas that we were talking about that had different levels of development. There were some stream corridors that passed through the area. And the more we talked, the more we said, we should probably pull those maps out. And we should probably go out there and take a look all together and just make sure we're all picturing it the same way. So it's really more of area investigation, I guess. Yeah. But I think coming up with articulating that would be helpful, so then when we show up at 5 o'clock, we have a work plan.
So the idea is
Yes, Grace?
so the idea is to really get a visual so that you can have a more informed discussion about what these districts look like, what's inherently problematic at this point with them.
We're going to focus
and then-
future development.
Yeah.
I think focusing specifically on Tenny Mountain Highway too, because there are two zones that converge right there and it's a little, I mean, if we just look at the Riverside Landing, that's fully within the agricultural zone.
Right.
And I, just as a side note, I just had this out, it does say that consider rezoning some places, and this is in our master plan, in the agricultural zone to commercial to accurately reflect the current and future use. But just seeing where those are, and Tenny Mountain Highway is gonna be, at this point, I think is gonna be where we're seeing our biggest pressure for commercial development. And just trying to get an idea of what's out there together instead of relying on our collective memory. I think just looking at it will be really helpful, so.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think the other thing you get a sense of looking at the maps and then going out there is the amount of space and where those constraints are, but the volume of space that we're talking about in the community, it seems different when you look at that map at that scale.
It really does.
You know. So do we want to, so our goals for that night would be to review the maps to understand the development activity so far, constraints to development, opportunities for development, other things that people can think of?
Is it not to assess whether the current uses in the districts match the definitions of the districts?
Okay.
So are you thinking beyond just Tenny Mountain and going to a bunch of different areas, or just focusing right on?
I was thinking just we might go to Riverside Landing and other locations along that route, but in that kind of general area. But I'm open to other ideas.
I think that's
I think that's
ambitious enough
yeah, I
for
think
one
so,
field
yeah.
trip, but I
Yeah.
think eventually, another concern that keeps coming up is uses in the agricultural zone.
Right. Which I think we started to address, and you'll see in that rural residential sheet, when we started to identify a rural residential district, different than single family, occupying a lot of, but not all of the agricultural district. When you start to think of, when you look at those minutes and look at the little purpose statement I started pulling together, but I didn't want to write on behalf of everybody, a lot of those uses seem out of character. Then we could go down through and say, okay, this doesn't make sense anymore.
Yes.
But at least know that there's going to be plenty of opportunity in whatever the Tenny Mountain Corridor district is, or whatever the gateway districts are. There are going to be some controls and some opportunities there for people. So it's shifting development. It's not removing development.
Right.
Putting it where the infrastructure is, which we keep coming back to.
Right.
Well, actually, the whole Tenny Mountain Highway, to me, in my mind, is like, okay, it's no more agricultural. It is
Right.
going to be all business, commercial.
Right.
It's what it is.
Yeah.
So you might as well call it what it is.
Right. And deal with it as such.
And the differences between the two zones are very minor anyway.
Right.
So it's almost like I don't even know how it was generated to be that way.
Sure.
Because it certainly doesn't reflect the corridor, the way the lines are drawn.
Right. Right.
And, because there are approved uses in both of those zones, you couldn't tell what zone you were driving through just by driving through it.
That's true.
It seems like our zones should be distinct enough that that you could have something that is very much a commercial industrial thing in the agricultural zone. Like, what's the point in having the commercial industrial zone at all if
like
almost
a
everything is
duplicate.
allowed, you know, in a similar way.
Should we make a list of places to potentially stop and to look at on the maps, and then we can edit that when we do review the maps?
I think that's a good
Because
idea.
just thinking about what you said, Brian, I think about stopping at like Hatch Plaza out in the parking lot where you can see the mobile development, you can
Yep.
see Riverside Landing, you're standing in Hatch Plaza. But that whole area, we're looking at a couple different districts within our viewshed. So you can start to have that conversation about should these places all fall into the same zoning and be addressed so that future development or redevelopment in those areas falls under the same rules, or should they be distinctly different? So that was one location I think of, and then kind of work our way to the west.
I think that Town West would be a good place to stop, because that would be the potential for a feeder road or a back street development, as we were discussing.
So where's that?
Yeah, it's on the, right by Harris Furniture.
Yeah,
Okay, yep.
actually,
That's forward.
no, Ford, Meredith, or Plymouth Ford. That's Town West.
That's the name of the road, Town West?
Yeah,
Town West Road.
where Mosenthal is.
Sanels.
Right.
I know.
That's a good
Steam Decks
idea.
used to be located back there.
Okay. That's a good idea. Other locations?
Seems like just considering what's going on in Riverside Landing, trying to get into there somewhere.
Yep.
Maybe in the liquor store parking lot or something. Maybe at the end. Depending on how it's going, maybe earlier
Liquor
on.
store parking lot.
Frank wants to object.
Depending on what time it is.
One thing that you might, at the Town West Road visit, part of our issues with all the subdivision approvals and application use of area is the setback areas, we call them the no man's land. And the issues that we're having trouble with in the drainage and the fact that a lot of, it's the 15-foot setbacks, everybody, property owners leave it alone, they don't maintain it, they don't do anything. And yet it affects the visibility, the look of the character of how we're utilizing the property. It also is forcing the state to do mitigation drainage programs. And a good Boulder Point, Walmart was a case in point where they met all the criteria for their drainage plans, and they were reviewed by engineers, and you signed and permitted. And not 30 days after their place moved dirt, the state's out there fixing a drainage system of Route 25, which is 50 or 60 years old. And you can't fool Mother Nature. You put water in a ditch that's not being properly configured, drained, and the size of piping. But all these places along there that are collectively going into a system, so-called, and yet aren't being maintained, and no one's addressed that issue. And the place, I give an example, the new gas station and the old liquor store, that's setback area. The area between, right across from Town West is the, I forget the guy's name that sells that house furniture, stonework, and all the things you put on your lawn.
Skipper.
Okay, yeah. There were 3 separate lots, and the areas between them are unmaintained for drainage, which is affecting the viability of the environment to accept all of this development properly. So it'd be something to look at to see the effects of processing, of what we need to think about when we ask an applicant on drainage programs, that they need to see that their work is going to connect with and flow with their neighbor's work, their neighbor's system. And so there's quite a few of them there, but people don't look at it and don't know what they're looking at, and don't know the effects of what's happening with all these developments. So that might be something to look
Oh,
at.
yeah.
Yeah, throughout the corridor. Other locations, it'd be good whether we stop or we just look as we go by, but to look at all the New Hampshire Electric Co-op properties there, because they were to ever move, they'd be in the middle of whatever district this is. I mean, and that's a redevelopment opportunity, potentially. Boulder Point, you mentioned,
Yeah.
and kind of the other end of the
Yep.
Town West Road.
Yeah, well,
I don't know if we want to go as far out as the Commerce Park, even though that's in the agricultural district.
I'm not exactly sure where,
think it
I think
is.
it's, we don't know because the line jogs back and forth across
Okay.
Tenny Mountain Highway. I think it's in the ICD because
Is it?
most of the
Okay.
weirdness is up by the Highland intersection,
Okay.
and then it runs.
Well, it's also, we should look at it too and sort of assess what its use is and what, I mean, really, we don't need to know what it is. We can
Right.
just-
Right.
Yeah, we can look at it with an open mind and just determine what it actually is and then try and fit use with.
Because there's a lot of, there are some businesses and a lot of land between Boulder Point and
Yeah.
there. If we look at the map and we refine or revisit our goals or understanding for what the exercise is going to be and look at the steps, the stops, again, together as a second point before we go out there, when we come back here to kind of bring our thoughts and observations together, I don't know, Grace, if you're going to be with us, if we could have Grace kind of facilitate on a flip chart and say, like, what did we learn? Like, if we could try to refine our conversations down so we don't lose
Yeah.
whatever it is we discover. I just hate to see us do all this and then not have anything to carry forward.
Should we be concerned about the land up and back of Harris Brothers? I mean, is that already, I don't even know what that's zoned. But I think that in the future, with that 25 acres, there's going to be some commercial businesses, whatever, up there.
That should be within our conversation. We've seen a development proposal there before, denied, but
Right, so we'd like to kind of make it so it'd be easier for somebody to come in with some businesses if they wanted to.
or recognize if it has too many wetlands or it's too
Yeah,
far out
yeah,
that it
or whatever.
it shouldn't be, but there are plenty of other places.
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
think it's part of the discussion.
Because right now, I don't have any idea what it is, what it even looks like
I
up
know, I've
there.
never been back to myself.
It's
So
a
we've got
very
another-
strange shaped property as well.
Is it?
It's shaped like a star.
Is it?
Star.
The acreage is in the center. Well, there's legs that come out.
That's interesting.
It's-
We do have another meeting where we can just touch base about, after we have some time to think about this stuff, if we, as we drive Tenny Mountain Highway in the next, I guess it's just another week, isn't it?
Yeah, next week.
So another meeting next week. Just think about if there's other locations or better locations. I mean, I've got 6 on the list right now, which is a lot. So I don't know if we want to necessarily add any more, but if there's ones that we want to swap out. Grace.
Grace, sorry. So one question, you're just wanting to look at existing uses, right? Because I know there's been some conversation about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but right now 3A is considered agriculture, but I know there's been some conversation about whether commercial zone could extend down to 3A.
We dealt with that 2 months ago as a gateway.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time on 3 and 3A.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really looking at the corridor that we've been talking about for what's out there now, but also what the potential zoning district could look like.
Okay.
It's kind of all on the table.
Steve, were you thinking of gateway districts more as an overlay or as a discrete zone, or were you just recognizing that they're there?
I mean, if we're redoing all this, I would make them a discrete zone. So it's not, as much as overlays make sense, I think people find them really confusing.
I think, if we're doing an overhaul, then it seems like an overlay is a good thing to do, like in between
Right.
major updates.
That way you or whoever follows you doesn't have to explain what an overlay is. Be acting it out and,
Right.
yeah. I mean, unless you think there's a reason to do it as an overlay, I don't.
Some sort of uniting thing, like sometimes towns will do like a shoreline overlay zone, so
Right.
anything that's within a certain distance from the river.
Environmentally sensitive zone is a perfect example.
Right.
I wasn't gonna bring that one up,
Overlay
but yeah,
I can say it.
yeah.
I think along this line of terminology, and that is the industrial commercial zone. The word industrial, the existing uses of the properties that are up there, the businesses that are up there, are not considered industrial. So that is something I think we want to look at. And if we're talking about highway commercial, and village commercial, and all these labels for areas. I think one one of the things we should look at is more in performance of a use of the land in any zone. And of course, any activity, if you're selling carrots out on it, you're in the agricultural commercial zone. You're a commercial business. So what areas are we trying to keep a certain type of activity in with a certain name label, and what differentiates that activity to the point that we need to specialize or control it? So that's one of the things you'd be looking at out on that walk.
That sort of begs a question. So I know the industrial commercial zone was named that to leave that option open for industrial businesses to come into that area. But who, and I'm sorry if I'm missed this at some point, but where does the zoning board and the planning board overlap in terms of terminology, or do they not, or is that, maybe you can help, or does that matter? Because I think he's talking about terminology and intent, and how is that defined, and where the zoning board.
We do all the definitions, all that stuff. The zoning board basically, I mean, it's deliberate in keeping them separate, is that we basically set the rules and the zoning board decides when they can break them, basically.
Yeah.
So,
But questions like, should there be industrial uses? The master
Right.
plan was the start of that conversation. We can continue that conversation while working on the zoning.
Yep.
And we can put it to the voters, and they'll ultimately decide if we're right or not, whether we choose to include them or not include them.
I would like to be cautious about getting too hung up on names
Yeah.
with the zones. I think in one meeting, we were getting so hung up on the name of one zone that just giving them a number or a letter, even just for our purposes, because it's not the name that determines the use, it's the meat within the zoning ordinance, not necessarily the name of the zone. So, we could maybe just pick a zone, we could name it after each member of the planning board.
Ugh.
Who wants the ICD?
I want agricultural.
But, really, it's as arbitrary as that, really, the naming goes. So,
Kind of, but I mean, the industrial zones, that's a strong word.
It is.
right.
Yeah, if you didn't want industry, that would be a bad name.
Right.
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 But, that
Just
runs the
fancy.
gamut from
We could call it-
boundaries to light manufacturing.
We could call it the industrial zone and then not allow for any industry in it,
That'd be confusing.
So, it'd be very confusing, but, that, I guess I'm just trying to, I think naming is maybe at the end to make sure the name suits what we've determined.
Right.
But I don't want to look at, like, this is the industrial zone and then just assume the industry is going to be a part of it, because that's what it's always been called, so.
I think it was a build it and they will come idea,
Yep.
that we would prefer to see any industry that came to town away from the river.
Yeah.
Wasn't there, it's just
Right.
my thought.
Just a point of order on that. The labels of names of zones are important because a lot of industries, businesses, in application to federal or state application processes, part of that is that the item proposed is situated in the appropriate zone of the town. So names and labels are very important. They have to have the technical background and support from the various agencies that recognize your authority as a land use event. So it's not a frivolous event, and the names of a zone is sensitive.
So there goes the build zone, I guess.
Yep, no bill zone. No, I guess I mean more for our planning purposes, that I don't want to get too stuck in what something's called until we figure out what is the best use for that land, whether it's in the agricultural zone or the single-family residential or whatever, so.
So it sounds like we have a plan for August 1st. Does that make sense?
I like a plan, yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Yep.
I asked the question, I don't know if we want to check with Grace and see if she's comfortable. If we were to come back, I just don't want to lose the conversations that are happening out there, and we can do our best to take notes, but coming back and trying to summarize what we saw, or what our initial thoughts were from board members would be helpful.
I
don't know
think
if-
that would be helpful.
I don't know if that's something you want to do.
So you're talking about the same day, August 1st? How many hours are you trying to give it to this?
I mean, I think if I could be here, if I could get in just a few minutes before 5 and get the projector set up with the files from the master plan, we could look at the maps pretty quickly and just make a note of things we want to be looking at while we're out there. So if we took 20 minutes or so to do that, and then we probably will spend an hour out there, I would guess.
I would think.
And then come back for a half an hour?
I'm happy to do that, but I'm also how sensitive to the fact that it's the chair of the board, and I don't know if some deviated decision.
I think we can put it to the board that it's hard for me to both participate and facilitate.
That was my thought, right.
And I think we've missed having some sort of, not a note taker, but somebody who's boiling down ideas and putting them on a flip chart or something like that. I know that's helpful for me, but it's hard. I find that I'm trying to think about things, but also taking meaningful notes is difficult. So, I don't know.
So I'm happy to do it, but I just have to say I don't have my schedule with me.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think
Just
I'm
let us,
available at
let
first,
us
but-
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also if you, when you've done it for us in the past and you've been able to say, I'm not quite following this, or I'm not quite understanding this, we're not articulating it well, and we need to, because it won't make sense later.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's helpful.
Okay. Is everyone good with that?
So when we go out, should we be looking at specific, there should be questions in my head that I should be looking at, or?
I think I heard Steve say he's gonna make a list of goals.
Okay.
Well, we started to here. We want to look kind of from the east to the west. It sounds like we'll travel through this corridor and kind of look at the amount of land that's there, the existing uses that are out there now, the kind of mix of uses, places that are available for development, places where we know from our other chapters that there are 2 stream corridors and wetlands. We'll be driving right by those. Some issues, like Frank pointed out, that there are some drainage issues, both related to the state highway and these private properties. There's some complexity there. Just kind of take it all in,
Okay.
and then come back and say, is it a big enough zone? Is it too big of a zone? Does it feel like 2 different zones? I mean, any of it's on the table to discuss. A couple times we've talked about focusing development around some of the kind of intersections that are forming, and then having maybe lower density development elsewhere in that zone. Like, we just want to rattle these things off. They might be still questions, but then they're things we can track down and try to provide some alternatives.
Yeah. So some of the questions I've sort of jotted down are, what are the constraints to development? Where are there opportunities for development? What are the current land uses versus what's zoned? Challenges for development, so like the stormwater issue. You mentioned size, so.
Because one of the challenges out there now, we have a big square, and it makes it seem like within the square, it's all equally developable, and that's not true. I mean, we had the applicant come in to do the storage units right up against the brook, and we had to ask for some accommodation there, but ultimately, that's probably it probably wasn't a great place to have development in the first place. And so are there places out there that we can encourage a much higher density of development, allow the activity to happen, allow for transportation options and for maybe living options? And then places, try to stay away from some of those stream corridors or the Baker River.
Because if we give a certain amount of space, that space, it can get filled evenly instead of trying, if there's a smaller amount of space, you'll see denser development.
Right.
So yeah, I'll put density, size, density on there.
And then we can look at examples of where that's happening in places and what would those regulations look like for the planning board and for the staff here at town hall. How would you regulate that? How would you communicate to people the vision for that? But here we are, we have transportation infrastructure, maybe even expanded transportation infrastructure over time, and we have water and we have sewer. So we have all the potential to do some really great development if we had the right regulations to guide that.
I'm sorry, Steve.
No, that's it.
It's also a kickoff for the infrastructure that we would like to see.
Yep.
Where would the sidewalk be
Right.
appropriate, north side or south side? Where would be the obvious crossings? Once we have that, and we formulate that as part of the development plan, that drives impact fees.
There you go.
We haven't been able to gather them because we don't have the development plan.
Yeah.
So it would serve two masters in that regard.
Yeah, and really shifting our role from just reacting to applications to being really proactive about what
Yes.
we see out there.
Right. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
Isn't there a trolley in town? You should see if you can get that. I'm serious. Isn't there a trolley? Like,
See if Alex Ray
Alex has it,
Travis
yeah.
Common,
drive
man.
us around.
Can you use that for this kind of a purpose? I know, I'm serious, like, wouldn't it be more meaningful if we kind of together, you could be hashing this stuff out and stay in vehicles? I don't know, I'm just usually a little.
It's more of a distraction.
So we can
Well, I'll
have
be
our
taking
last stop
pictures
be
on the
Frosty
trolley.
Scoops.
Hey,
Or-
hey.
It's a good idea, but it's another logistic.
Whatever. Where?
At a local ice cream place.
Yeah, there you go.
I guess we'll know where we'll be going at the end of our tour.
You could just hijack Alex's ice cream wagon.
Yeah.
I think we'd all fit, and it's stocked.
Yes.
I don't think it drives though.
Yeah.
Had to get towed there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, maybe we can even have TV in there, the TV, yeah.
Mobile on the
Yeah.
road.
Right.
Oh, this would be a thing. Planning board on the road.
And then everyone in town would watch.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So this seems like a good plan, and maybe we can just come up with some questions for everybody before the next meeting, so we can take those home and just sort of think about those in the couple weeks before we have the next meeting.
This is kind of like an off-the-wall question, but,
All right.
so Steve, have you heard of like opportunity zones? And apparently, Tenny Mountain Highway qualifies for,
Oh, it does?
yeah, it's one of the 27.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's
What does that
something to
mean?
keep
What does that mean?
mean? I'll tell you what it means. It basically is for funding. It's investors can defer capital gains on earnings that have been reinvested in the zones through opportunity funds. The private sector investment vehicles invest about 90% of the capital in opportunity zones. Regardless, it's for the fact that that zone is kind of like low income. It would qualify for competitive monies for development. And I'm really not entirely sure how we could be using that, but.
It's geared more towards housing, though, isn't it?
It could be housing, but I don't think it doesn't really specifically state housing.
But it makes me wonder about your comment about having a development plan and the infrastructure that follows that.
Yeah.
Are there any planning funds that could be used to create the development plan Brian talked about to kind of guide that investment?
Yep.
Yeah, you guys have a small budget, it's mostly postage and that kind of thing, but
But I wonder if there's any funds,
Yeah.
because we're an
Yeah,
opportunity
larger
zone,
funds.
that we could have Lakes Region or somebody work with us to do like a mini master plan
Yeah.
for
Yep.
the district once it's identified.
That would
Why
be
is
good.
Tenny Mountain considered an opportunity zone?
I'm not entirely sure.
Someone
It
submitted
says
it.
portions of Plymouth, like the Tenny Mountain Highway, fall into the 27 designated opportunity zones. And it's based on designated opportunity, all of which are low-income communities. New Hampshire did not designate any eligible non-low-income contiguous tracts as opportunity zones. So it's just for the fact that we're,
Or?
yep.
But one of 27
Yeah.
total.
Yep. And there's, like maps and, in fact, they have the criteria of what they place it at. Does somebody want this?
I'll take it and scan it and give everybody copies.
Oh, I can, actually, what I can do is forward it too. Might be easier for most people, sorry, Bonnie.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. I'm used to that. Sometimes
Anyway.
the less I know, the better off I am.
We can get you a paper copy.
Okay.
But it did come up, I had a meeting with Aaron Cotton of Annie Custer's office,
Okay.
so. But, sounds exciting.
Well, it sounds like we should do a good job with the zoning because maybe an area where people want to do something even more now.
You can just call it the
Yep.
opportunity zone.
Yep.
There you go.
That's a great name.
Wow.
It's very engaging and enticing.
It is. So the other thing is I'm thinking about your class coming up in, because we basically have one, maybe two more work sessions before you want to introduce something
Right.
to your class. I was going through the implementation section of our master plan, and I think it might be helpful if we just sort of sift through some of these things, because there's a lot of very zone-specific things that as we're creating, not just the use sheets, but as we're kind of creating like things that we need to do, is picking out what goes with each zone as it exists now, and even things that are, some things might not actually be listed as like in this zone, but it's clearly something for that specific zone. So I don't know if in the next month or two we can maybe assign different zones to different people and have them pick through the implementation chapter and just kind of create a hit list of like, okay, this is what we're saying about, this is what's coming out of the master plan about the agricultural zone, this is what's coming out about highway, commercial. Does that make sense?
That would be great, because we could actually add a list of just those notes
Yep.
from the master plan on these sheets.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be great.
Does that work for everybody?
Sure.
It helps kind of synthesize all this information down to these sheets, which will help us kind of identify what the districts look like, what their purpose and their dimensional and use regulations are.
I am struck on how that really does tie in with this exercise and the master plan in all aspects.
Can we, go ahead.
Are those sheets available for the public, the ones that, the draft sheets that you created for each zone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can
Checking to see if he has one.
Got it.
Otherwise, I'm happy to email it to anyone, but it's like you're in business.
Awesome. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say if we could just maybe split those up, responsibilities up, and try and get those, it just seems like if we can get those by August, that would make sense, then we can synthesize them and get them to your students. So does anyone have I think maybe we're just working off of these sheets as they exist, and then we just need like a agriculture, I think needs, because we don't have an agricultural one.
No,
right?
we have rural residential.
Rural residential, are we gonna I guess we need to
It
distinguish.
basically is the agricultural zone still. I don't want to add something to the to-do list for Team Bridget and Chris.
Yep.
But
Well, I think that kind of dovetails. I mean, what I imagined we would do is sit down and go through all of the implementation items and sort of designate, according to my recollection of my notes, what things would be appropriate for the schools extend learning opportunities, short-term, long-term, which ones relate to subdivision and
even if you could just flag it, this relates to a zoning
Zone,
district. Even if you
right.
don't say which zoning district, I could go through the students and pull them out, and we could stick the notes on these. I mean, what I see happening with the students when I get to meet them in September is finding out what their skill sets are, and then bringing them up to speed on what we're working on, and then coming back to all of you, probably at our second meeting, if I could have a few minutes on the agenda, and I'll remind you of this, but kind of laying out what our options are. How can we use their time
Yep.
to help both refine these? Maybe there'll be some mapping skills within the class. There could be some research case study examples for like, in this district, this is what this could look like, or here's where there's a regulation that's similar. So kind of that background stuff that the board won't necessarily do between meetings, that we could use them to do and be beneficial to them.
Part of having everyone pick through the whole implementation chapter is just a good way to read through everything
Yeah.
again,
That's a
too.
good point.
So, because every time I go through it, like I look at it once a month and I forget half of it. So I think it might be a useful exercise for the board to pick through and just pull out those things. So, especially if we're each assigned, it doesn't. I mean, I pick through it, looking through this for site plan and subdivision stuff in half an hour. So, and I was able to scan through it enough. So I don't think it's going to take more than maybe an hour or two per zone if you're pretty careful. So,
How do we want to share our combined comments, or like, how do we pull it together into one version?
If everybody's doing it individually and Chris and I sit down together and put our heads together on it, and then we bring it to a work session and everybody has their notes,
Yep.
we
That'd
can
be fine.
collate them that way.
Yeah, or I'm happy to put them in a chunk before the meeting and print them out for everybody or something like that. So I don't know. Because it seems, I guess I forgot that you guys were going to be flagging stuff, but I know Chris needs to look into like when things are like trying to pull out those important dates that we need to be thinking about sooner rather than later, so, yeah. Do you think,
I think we're talking, it seems like we're talking about everybody doing the same task.
but with each, with individual
Yeah.
zones?
Right.
So everyone would get assigned a zone and pick through it and look through it, so. Do people have time for that? I mean, if it's something that, I don't think it would take long for two people to do either. I'm just trying to get everyone to look through the implementation, because I think it's really helpful. As I look through, I'm like, oh, we're dealing with this now, we're dealing with this now. To me, it's just reinforcing the work we're doing, so, I don't know.
The other looming deadline that we would have is if we developed enough information to recommend a zoning change, there's a window that we have to hit for that too, for public
Yeah.
hearings and everything.
I don't think we're gonna get this done by next town meeting.
Yeah, I was just about to
Yeah.
ask if anybody had a feeling of anything that they would like to see come forward.
I think that this is a 2021.
Especially because once we come to terms with what it is we want to recommend, I think the amount of public outreach and education and engagement is going to be,
It's going to take more than two public hearings.
yeah, otherwise it's just going to get voted down.
Yeah.
And all this would be for naught, but.
Are you trying to do that all at once? All the zoning
No.
suggested changes at once?
If we're
Or are
talking
you trying
about,
to say like in 20, between 19 and 20 you do 3 zones and then have public hearings and do some warrant articles and then the next, I'm just wondering.
I think that the changes are significant enough that it would be tough to push through a few at a time. I think that we're,
You have to do a major overhaul all at
Yeah.
once. That's what you're saying.
And to make it readable and user-friendly and easier for staff to talk with the public who's not accustomed to the language. Yeah, it may be favorable to go that way, because we could maybe get some of it adopted, but it would just leave a really kind of weird, wonky.
yeah, I think we need to think in September, October about anything pressing that needs to get updated in the zoning ordinance, and just kind of what we've been doing for the past number of years is just get critical things in there.
I
But-
was just
yeah.
following to see if anybody had an itch for something at this point.
Right.
No itches here.
I mean, come October, if all of a sudden we've just moved along really quickly and you all
Yeah.
think that we have an all-star group assisting us in
We
between
got 20
meetings.
people coming to every meeting and they're champions for the cause.
I mean, if we just end up with I only have 9 students,
Yeah.
so it could go really well if they all have really distinct skill sets and we can work really well together. If they can be bringing you stuff in September and October, and you feel like, wow, we should really make a go for this,
Yeah.
I'm up for it, but I'm also skeptical.
Yeah.
Just seeing how long it's taken us to get to this point.
Yep. And we're doing something as a board that often towns are hiring. I mean, we're lucky, we have Steve on the board who does this for a living. So we do have a consultant, but he's serving in a volunteer role as well. So, this is something you would often be paying a consultant to do, and it would probably take just as much time. So
That'd be faster.
it would be faster, okay.
If someone would be getting paid to work on it in
Yeah.
between meetings.
Yeah, it just took us a long time to get the master plan. But we lost our consultants for that too, so. But yeah, so it would still take time though, to get the town buy-in. So we're working on a all volunteer, Brian notwithstanding.
I'm volunteering tonight.
Okay. So back to
Assignments?
so what I was thinking is maybe good homework. Is this something that folks have time to do, are interested in doing, think is valuable? I don't want to just be arbitrarily telling people what to do on their summer evenings, so.
I'm going to have to go through all this fresh with the students in September, so I'd rather not go through the implementation actions right now, because I'm
Okay.
going to be spending so much time on it this
Okay.
fall.
Okay.
But I don't want to stop others from doing
Do you
it.
think it's a valuable thing for us to do, or do you think we should?
I think your point of just
Yeah.
being, even if it's just to be reacquainted with the actions, I
Yeah.
think that's valuable. And then what Bridget and Chris come up with will resonate more. And if people are willing to take, it's just hard to know everything about any one district. And so there may, like Marianne and I could probably look at the same implementation actions and think that the district that we're looking for is that thing. Some of them are going to be not as clear.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So we just familiarize ourselves with the implementation plan then, or?
And,
Review it and make your notes.
yeah, I think just go through
Priority.
and even just go through and flag things that you're like, oh, this is good for the agricultural zone.
Maybe good for more than one zone.
Yeah.
Right, too?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that would be great if we could do that. If everyone could go through and just make their own notes. I'm about halfway through getting the entire implementation section into a Excel spreadsheet, so if that's something that people want to flip through so they can put a note.
That would be great.
Okay.
That would make it a lot easier.
All right, I'm going to prioritize that then.
Didn't we start with that, or what?
It was always in weird tables that,
Okay.
yeah, with different size columns, and
Yeah.
I don't even want to think about it. But yeah, I can prioritize that. It's just a lot of copying and pasting. I can do it, work with 2 screens. It's pretty easy, so. So I think, what would make sense is everyone to go through, pick through the implementation chapter and pull out those things that resonate with each, district. And then we can try and sort of merge those lists. So if it's something that you could type up, we can combine those things together, so.
That's good.
Right? Does that work for everyone? I'll remind everyone again, the next meeting, because we do have another meeting in a week, so.
So we are meeting next week?
Yeah, this is our regular, this is the,
In lieu of the 4th.
yeah,
Oh,
so.
gotcha.
That patriotic holiday, once again.
All right. Is everyone good with assignments and what's coming up next? Okay. All right, what's that?
Public? Are we done?
Any other updates?
No, we do have some business for, the potential business for the August public hearing meeting.
Okay,
People have been talking to me, but pretty simple.
okay,
One is a change of use that goes back to the administrative site plan review versus the full-blown site plan review. You know, because I asked the people to go through the site plan review checklist. Don't hesitate asking for waivers on that, because they're not proposing anything that changes the landscape at all.
yeah,
So, you know, it's mostly a social thing, and actually, the only reason they're coming is because they're dictated to. You know, this would be just another change of ownership, you know, had it not been, you know, a commercial project like that,
Gotcha.
that's required to be looked at by the planning board.
okay, so that's the August meeting, August 15th.
Yes. Or somewhere out there.
Any other updates from other boards? I'm just looking at you, Bill.
You're the other board.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm assigned to the planning board. No, I don't think so. No, Conservation Commission, we haven't even, oh, did we meet? I don't even know. Chris will do a report next time.
Okay, what about anything on the select board?
Oh, that's true. I'm on the select board too. No, actually, we're gonna next meet on Monday, I guess. Yeah, we had just a work session that nothing came out of that worthy of reporting. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Anything else from the public?
Good job, team.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Bridget, didn't you have something you wanted to suggest?
Well, I don't know. It seemed feasible.
Try it anyway.
Well, Brian mentioned that in past years, the planning board takes a break from the meeting.
Oh,
But it seems like we've got a significant amount of work session.
yep.
I was just suggesting that if you guys ever feel like you're burned out and you would like to skip a work session as a group instead of individuals taking vacations, you shouldn't feel guilty about it.
Okay. I thought we were gonna, I thought for some reason the meeting was scheduled for July 4th. I was like, woo, we're off the hook, but here we are.
It doesn't work like that.
It seems like we should definitely, I think that's a great idea. And I think we should take a break at some point. We haven't really taken a work session off in Probably since have I been chair for 2 years?
It's been free.
Yeah, easily,
Isn't that long?
longer, yeah.
You were here before I got here, and I'm on my second year.
All right.
Yeah, I've been with you for 2.5 and you were chair. No, actually, Steve Rhodes was chair.
He left right at
Right
about
at the
now.
shift, yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I guess if we want to decide on, it's just tough. It's like holiday season would be great, but that's when we're coming up with zoning amendments and,
The first
Really-
available one would be the September
okay.
But
first.
if you want to maximize use of my students, you might want to
Yep.
have them come in right away.
I propose next July. I mean, I'm like half kidding, but that's the best time.
Sounds like the Grinch.
Maybe our regulatory amendments won't be that significant, and we can take one of those holiday.
And it may turn out that there's no planning board business for September and you get the third Thursday off.
There you
Let's,
go.
yeah, let's think of, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for bringing that up.
Sure.
I think we deserve it.
You can take tomorrow off,
Just me or everybody?
everybody.
We used to have a lot more work sessions off.
Yes. We're trying to make up for that.
Yep. All right. Like I said, Chris isn't here, so I'm not sure how we're ever going to get out of here.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
I was daydreaming there.